Countdown to Halloween 2023, featuring eerie and uncanny tales of haunts, ghosts, and suspense. October is finally here. Join us all month for special Halloween presentations on Storylink Radio's YouTube channel as we count down to Halloween 2023. Keep a close eye on YouTube alerts or you'll miss one. Celebrate October with us right here and now. Tonight's presentation from Storylink Radio. The Slime Mutants of Clear Lake. Diane pulled out her favorite sweatshirt. It was so faded and worn, the message on the front, "Make Earth Day every day," was barely readable. Oh, great, there goes the rain. As she was closing her backpack, the door to her room opened and her mom leaned in. "Mr. Carter's outside in the van," she said. "Are you ready?" "You bet," Diane answered happily. She had been looking forward to this weekend at Clear Lake for weeks. "Don't forget to pack your medicine," her mom reminded her. "I'm still not sure you're well enough to go." "Mom, my cold's almost gone. I promised to stay warm." Diane had worked hard to convince her parents that she should be allowed to go on the trip. Mr. Carter, the science teacher, often took the Earth Science Club on field trips, but this would be the first time they were going to camp out. Besides, it was sort of a celebration, too. Until last year, the Clear Lake had not deserved its name. It had been a dumping site for all sorts of trash and who knows what else from the nearby town. Diane's Science Club had been part of a special effort to stop the dumping and clean up the lake. Cold or no cold, this field trip was a must. The trip up the mountain road took only a couple of hours. At the campsite, Mr. Carter and the 8 kids quickly set up their tents. Since it was still early in the season, there was no other campers around, so the group had its choice of the best site close to the lake. "Who wants to go for a swim?" Paul Cully called out, appearing at the opening to tent wearing just his swimsuit. "Hey, that sounds like a great idea," Mr. Carter agreed. "But I have to gather some kindling and set up our fire pits first. I don't want anyone going out in the water unless I'm with you, all right?" Everyone groaned. "I can find kindling," Diane chimed. "I still have a cold. I can't go swimming." "Well, that's very nice of you, Diane," said Mr. Carter. "Okay, you're in charge of setting up the fire." Within minutes, the rest of the group was splashing knee-deep in the cold water. Paul, Terry, and Josh were the first to dive in. Each surfaced a few yards from the shore, sputtering and shivering. "It's not so cold out here," Terry lied. "Come on." "Be careful," Mr. Carter warned. "The rocks in the bottom are covered with algae and it can be slippery." "Cool," Diane's best friend Sarah said, slipping on her diving mask and snorkel. "I'll see what else is down there." She eased out a little deeper into the lake, studying the rocks beneath that were carpeted with delicate strands of algae. She dived down and picked up a long, flat rock to get a better look at it. Gripping it in one hand, she cringed when it started to wriggle, and then she felt a nip on her fingers, and the object squirmed out of her grasp. Sarah's startled scream took the form of a stream of bubbles heading for the surface. She whirled in the water and followed the bubbles up, and then she swam for the shallows where Mr. Carter, Lisa, and Bill were gathering some water samples in jars. "Mr. Carter," Sarah gasped, pushing her mask up to her forehead, "I picked up this rock, and it was all slimy, and it moved. It really did, and it bit me." She held out her hand to show a tiny drop of blood at the tip of her finger. "Calm down, Sarah," the teacher said soothingly. "The algae makes the rock slippery. You probably just dropped it." "No, sir. It wriggled and wiggled and back and forth, trying to get away." Lisa looked up from filling a jar. "It's probably a fish, one of those flat fish that live in the bottom. You thought it was a rock." "Flat fish don't bite," whined Sarah. "And besides, it was covered with all this weird, stringy-looking algae." "You mean like this?" Paul waded toward them. He was holding a handful of the slimy green stuff. Long strands of it dripped between his fingers. "What is all this stuff, Mr. Carter?" The science teacher ripped off a bit of the weird plant and looked at it closely. I'm not sure." He reached into his shoulder pack, took out a plastic box, and put the smallest algae sample inside. "We'll take it back with us and try to find out what it is," he said, tucking the box into his pack. "Look," Sarah pointed to the bushes where the bushes were growing right along the shoreline. "It's over there, too." Algae had covered the lower branches of the bushes. Their leaves were furry with it, in fact, and the strings of the emerald-colored slime clung to the branches that overhung the lake. "That's strange," said Lisa. She stood up and sloshed toward the bushes. "It seems to be growing just as well out of the water as in it." As she stood examining the strands, something drifted out from under the branch and gently bumped her leg. "Gross!" she screamed and backpedaled toward the several steps. "Mr. Carter, look at this." The body of a large dead duck was floating in the water. Most of its feathers were covered with a fine layer of algae. The longest strands hung from its open beak. Bill whistled softly. Wow, that stuff must grow fast. You think it's poison? Maybe the duck tried to eat it? Mr. Carter shook his head, then looked at the lengthening shadows on the shore. I I don't know what to make of it. I think it's best if we all get out of the water, though. We'll come back out in the morning. He rubbed his hands over his shorts. And then we get back, I'll warm up a tub of water. I want you all to wash your hands really well, okay? Paul nodded. Yeah, this stuff's kind of sticky. Excited from their adventure into the lake, the club members trooped into camp, laughing and chattering. Diana gathered an impressive pile of kindling and had set up by the fire pit. How was the water? She asked cheerfully. It was great, Josh answered, except for the attack of the mutant green slime. Everyone laughed. Diane raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Josh grinned. Nothing. There's just this strange stuff growing in the lake, and after everything that was dumped in there over the years, it's no surprise. Yuck. And you were swimming in it? Diane said, wrinkling up her nose. Now I'm not sorry I didn't go. Anyway, the fire's ready to be lit. You did a fine job, Mr. Carter added. I don't know about all of you, but I'm hungry. Who wants to eat? The answer was a general cheer. While the other kids changed into dry clothes, Diane scouted around the edge of the clearing for more wood. She noticed a small branch sticking out from under a clump of bushes. As she slid it out, a squirrel scurried out from under one of the bushes. Squirrels. Why did it have to be squirrels? Hi, little guy. Sorry if I'm... Her words froze in her throat. The squirrel had turned and bared its long chisel-like teeth at her. Then it made a strange hissing noise as if it were trying to growl. Diane had never seen a squirrel behave like that. Even in the deepening shadows of twilight, she could see clearly enough to realize that she had never seen a squirrel that looked like this one either. Its glistening fur was a patchwork of deep emerald green, and strands of slime hung loosely from its snout. The small creature lunged. Diane jumped back and fell out of its way as it dashed back into the undergrowth. Wow! Diane whispered in awe. She stood up slowly and dusted herself off and decided not to mention the incident to the others. No one would believe that she'd been attacked by a vicious green squirrel anyway. By the time the full moon had risen, there was a blazing fire in the pit and everyone was roasting hot dogs. It was a clear, crisp night, and Diane pushed any thoughts of the strange squirrel out of her mind, until Lisa mentioned the strange algae and the dead duck they'd found floating in the lake. It wasn't like anything I've ever seen before, Lisa whispered. The stuff seemed to be growing in patches. I can't believe I touched it. Absent-mindedly, she reached down and scratched above her ankle, the spot where the duck had bumped into her. Something about Lisa's hand caught Diane's eye. What have you got under your fingernails, Dan? She asked. Lisa looked at her fingernails. Then she turned her finger toward the fire and slowly pulled up the pant leg of her jeans. Both girls gasped. A large patch of green fuzz covered the side of Lisa's calf and ankle. Mr. Carter, Diane said, her voice quivering, I think you better take a look at this. The science teacher came over and knelt down to examine Lisa's leg. But just then Paul jumped up and dropped his hot dog into the fire. Look! The palms of both his hands were covered with fine green strands, and there was green stains between his fingers. Even as they all watched, the stains became slightly fuzzy. Paul grabbed a handful of dirt and rubbed his hands together frantically. What is it, Mr. Carter? It hurts, he wailed. Lisa rubbed at her leg. Sarah started to cry when she, too, found large greenish stains forming on her hands. Don't panic, Mr. Carter tried to calm them. It must be some kind of allergic reaction. I have some medication that should help. He grabbed his shoulder pack and flipped open the top. Inside, the plastic sample box had come open, and everything was covered with slimy green algae. What the... Mr. Carter dropped the bag and began to rub at his own hands. Dark stains were spreading up his arms. I don't know what's going on here. We need help. Everybody get in the van. We got to get into town. The keys... He felt in his pockets. Diane could tell from his voice that something was terribly wrong with him. He was losing control. Where are the keys? He screamed. They must be in here. He picked up the shoulder pack and turned it over and dumped the contents on the ground. Like everything else, the keys to the van were coated with slime. Mr. Carter dropped to his knees and grabbed them in the dirt, but before he could reach them, Sarah kicked the keys into the fire. Mr. Carter, Diane screamed, pointing at Sarah. What's happening to her? Sarah stood grinning beside the fire. Long strands of green slime hung from her lips, and when she opened her mouth to speak, she sputtered and drooled. The slime was obviously growing inside of her mouth, too. Nothing's happening to me, Sarah said, turning her face to Diane. At least nothing that concerns you, yet. But I can fix that. She reached out her ooze-covered hand. Diane squirmed away while the other kids gathered behind Sarah. Diane looked from one to the other. Every one of them was spotted with large patches of the grotesque green stuff. The rancid odor stung Diane's nostrils. Tears filled her eyes. Sarah, you're my best friend. What are you doing? I just want to hold your hand, friend, Diane moaned. What's wrong with you? With all of you? Stop whining, you little brat. Mr. Carter stood up and shuffled toward her. In the firelight, she could see that he was baring his teeth, now sharp and pointed like the squirrel's had been. This slime, whatever it is, this slime is changing you, all of you, Diane sobbed. I'll get help. She scrambled to her feet and backed away toward the forest. I can make it to town. It's not so far, she continued to babble as they all moved closer to her. I'll get you help. Suddenly a form grabbed at her from the shadows. Who says we want help? The slime-covered being snarled with what sounded like Josh's voice. Diane twisted away from its grasp. Stumbling and crying, she raced into the forest. Twigs and branches seemed to reach out for her. They scraped at her face and hands as she lurched forward. She could hear the others following close behind. Which way was the main road? In the pale moonlight, she saw a clearing ahead and changed course toward it. She ran out into the open space and stood gasping for air. Suddenly there was a screech from above, and a creature dived at her from the sky. The horrible slime dripped from its widespread wings and sharp talons, which Diane barely managed to dodge. Only the creature's glowing eyes were free of the stuff. From its piercing cries, she could tell the thing had once been an owl. It turned to attack again, and Diane ducked back into the trees. She waited until the screeches finally died away. The silence settled in like a fog, and the entire forest seemed to press close around her. Where are they? There she caught a scent on the air. It was a dank, musty smell. It was growing stronger. Then she saw something glinting through the trees just a few yards away. It was the remains of their campfire. Oh no, I've doubled back to the lake. Diane edged around the dense vegetation near the rocky shore. Now she could hear the low growls of the monsters that had once been her friend, and they were coming closer. Closer. Frantically, she looked from side to side. There was nowhere to run. She glanced fearfully at the calm water. They had said the slime was in the water, but that was further down the shore. Maybe the lake was all right here. Step by step, she carefully worked her way over the rocks and eased into the icy lake up to her knees. The water glinted in the moonlight. It didn't feel slippery. The sound of something heavy lumbering over the rocks forced her to make a decision. She silently slipped under the overhanging branches and hid among the shadows. The water, now up to her neck, was so cold it was painful, but she bit her lip and didn't make a sound. Snuffling and grunting, several of the horrid creatures limped along the shore. They seemed to be communicating with one another, but no human sound emerged. Diane shrank back into the darkness. Her heart was pounding so hard that she was afraid they might hear it. One of the creatures stepped close enough that she could have reached out and touched its slime-slick leg. Diane held her breath and squeezed her eyes shut. She was barely aware of the low-growing leaves and twigs that scratched her face as she withdrew further among the branches. Finally, the hideous beast hobbled away over the rocks. Diane waited until everything was silent, and then she groped her way out of the water. Her feet were almost numb with the cold, but she ran. Within moments, she stumbled out onto the narrow dirt road that the group had traveled to reach the campsite. She raced downhill and finally reached the main highway. Every breath was agony as she continued to flee down the center of the pavement, afraid to wander too near to the dense forest on either side. She knew only too well what terrible secrets those trees were hiding. All at once she realized there was something behind her, something drawing nearer. She whirled around and stared into what looked like two huge gleaming eyes. Miss, wait, don't be afraid. What are you doing out here alone? The owner of the voice stepped closer. Diane was able to make out a tall woman in a uniform. The gleaming eyes were the headlights of a car. She felt faint and sensed the ground under her feet starting to spin. A moment later, someone was wrapping a jacket around her and helping her into a car. As her head cleared, she realized it was a highway patrol car. The officer who was driving it was speaking into the mouthpiece of his police radio. Yeah, I don't know. Her clothes are all damp. I can't imagine she's been in the lake. Yeah. Okay, yeah, we'll bring her in first. Right. And then we'll head on back to check whether everyone else is down there. Yeah, right. Will do. He finished his call and looked into his rearview mirror. Diane. Well, young lady, how are you feeling? Can you tell us what happened to you? Diane opened her mouth, but she couldn't seem to make a sound. Don't worry, honey, her female officer said. Whatever happened, you're safe now, right? The woman reached under her seat, pulled out a small bag, and fished out a compact and some tissues. Here you go, honey. You dry your eyes. You try to rub some of that dirt from your face. It'll make you feel better. We'll be in town in a few minutes, right? Diane took the tissues and dabbed at her eyes. Opening the lighted compact, she began to clear the dirt from her face. Then she felt a low scream rising in her throat. She rubbed harder and harder at the dark greenish stain on her cheek, but it wouldn't go away. It only got bigger and greener and bigger and bigger. You've just heard tonight's story from Storylink Radio's Countdown to Halloween 2023. Remember to come back for our next tale. Many more stories of all genres available to listen to and read along with now on our website at www.storylinkradio.com. Visit our YouTube channel at youtube.com/storylinkradio. And visit our podcast for easy mobile listening anywhere, anytime. Just search for Storylink Radio on your favorite podcast provider. Oh, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and click that alert bell for Storylink Radio.